Ms. Zoe, she's a social media manager and strategist. She has worked with Spotify. Many of you are familiar with Spotify. Okay, so she was their social media manager for quite some time before currently working with Semester at Sea. Zoe, over to you.
Thank you so much. You shared very kind words. I don't know if I'm deserving of them, but hopefully I can show you throughout this workshop if I am or not. But yeah, so I currently am doing social media coordination on Semester at Sea, the study abroad program. And what that means is my role is to create content on the ground, capturing the stories of the experiences that students are having abroad while traveling with us. And I work with an office based in the United States, and we together come up with strategies that help to engage our audience of different people and different interests, and also to reach new audiences that don't know what the brand is. So that's the main purpose of this role, is to spread brand awareness. Before here, when I was at Spotify, I was helping with podcast marketing, so the approach was slightly different. And we can talk more about the strategies and how they're different between brands later on in the conversation. But working on Semester at Sea, I'm currently a contractor and also a freelancer, so I don't work for them full time. And once the voyage is over, then I'll be working with new clients, whereas with Spotify, I was a full-time employee. So that's something that you can also consider in your career journey, like if you would want to be a free agent, working for various clients, or if you'd want to work full-time for a brand. And both of those avenues come with different challenges and also different benefits. So that's something to consider. In addition to this, I've also worked for marketing agencies, which are slightly different from the two paths I've expressed. And the way that an agency is different is that it's a company, but the company itself handles multiple clients. So you might work on different accounts, which could be interesting and cool, while also still having the stability of knowing you'll always still be at a company that's like bringing you clients. And we can explore those differences later in our conversation as well. Yeah.
That's great. So much to do. I've accomplished in some few years. So, how many years from you leaving college, right, to now? How many years did you engage in this organizations with this organization, rather?
So I graduated college in 2014. So it's been 10 years since I graduated. And at that point, I was working for an events marketing agency. And so this kind of can explain more about my background. I actually started in events and conference planning. And the whole job there is to connect with audiences and build communities for brands to get connected deeper to customers. And so over time, as social media started to emerge more as a channel for people to find potential clients and customers, my role moved from being a in-person events community builder to an online digital communities builder. And that's why I'm doing this now.
All right, thank you, Zoe. I love asking people this before we dive in. Are you passionate about this? Because there's a thin line between passion, right? Following my passion and, well, this is my career. I need to get into something that would put food on my table. So does passion actually contribute to what you're doing, or you just see it as a means to an end?
I love that question because it actually changes for me regularly. I mean, there's always ebbs and flows, and in any career, I feel like there are seasons in which you're really excited about the projects that you take on, and there are seasons where you might just be taking on projects because you need to survive and want to make sure that you have a stable life. And so in deciding in my career choices, as mentioned before, I was in finance. I'm not a finance girly. I don't know if you can tell, I don't really work super well in that formal corporate space. but I took that role because I was in a panic after graduating from college and I had student loans to pay back. And I was like, I just need a stable job. And so I did that for a couple of years, but that gave me one, the grounding and stability to exist and survive, while also giving me the skills, like some skills that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, about how to invest and how to have a good business acumen. And so I feel like no matter what role you take, even if it's not something you're super excited about, but maybe is taking care of you that day, you can still learn and take away pieces from that experience once you are provided an opportunity that you're super excited about. Now, that being said, after a few years in finance, I knew when the expiration date was up and I had enough of that experience, and I was able to then jumpstart into a new role that gave me the opportunity to travel around the world 3 years after I graduated college, and I haven't stopped traveling full time since then. So you never know where things will lead you. And I think that if you can get to know yourself enough to understand what day to day tasks and things are enjoyable for you or challenging in a way where you feel like you're growing through the task, that even if the industry or the title itself isn't super exciting, you can still enjoy the work that you're doing and find something meaningful out of it.
Thank you. That is a very interesting way to answer that question. There are days that you don't actually feel passionate about what you're doing. Very true. Because so many times your career will pose a form of challenge to you in one way or another. You might wake up one day and your camera is not responding, right? And you have lots of you have backlogs of job to get up to. So that day, I can be sure that you might not really feel passionate about what you're doing. But what keeps you going is that a spirit of excellence, right? Doing the best, bringing the best out of every situation that you get yourself into or you are going through in your career. And most importantly, to iterate what you're saying, that it's not all about passion every time, right? So as people, as students that are about to embark on this career journey, it's okay to have changes, right? It's okay to navigate through things. It's okay to not feel totally good about this and say, okay, let me try my hands at other things, right? So you are still on a path to discovery. You're still on a path to imagine. And when you emerge, that means you've gone through so many phases, right? You've changed in one way or another. But the bottom line is, through those phases of changes, remain excellent in what you do. That let's talk about social media management and online communities. What is this industry like? And what skills are relevant to working there?
So it's actually a really fun way to pose the question, because I think that social media as an industry or as a market is pretty young. I mean, it's been around since the mid 2000s, so maybe a little over a decade. But comparatively, like that compared to finance or like project management, it's very young compared to those roles. And I think that companies are still trying to understand what it means to have a social media manager. So there's actually so many different avenues that you can tackle to be part of social media management. And up until this point, I think companies typically will just throw social media management in general to an intern or someone who they're like, oh, you're young, you know what's happening on the internet. And while a lot of people are successful being thrown into the fire like that, it also creates a lot of churn in the industry because people get burnt out really quickly working for brands that are throwing these things. And the reason is for someone to do all aspects of social media, it means you would have to be a copywriter, so someone who knows how to write captions and think about hooks, and you have to be a good storyteller. It means that you might have to be a good photographer and now a good cinematographer because of Reels and TikTok. It means that you have to have a marketing mindset. It means you have to be a good project manager and know how to handle multiple responsibilities and juggle multiple things at once. And in any other team, outside of like social media management, there's probably one person in each of these roles rather than having one person do 5 or 6 different jobs. So I think the more versatile you can be, the better at this stage. But I also am witnessing a trend in companies where they're starting to recognize like, hey, someone who is recording the video or being the face of the content might have a different skill set than the person who's writing the captions. So if you also find that there's one aspect to social media you particularly excel at, or that you feel excited about learning about more, then I say definitely specialize too, because I think companies are starting to hire in that way.
Great. So this will lead me to the next question I want to ask before going to our four-plant question. This means that there's a lot of work to be done as a social media manager in making organization realize the importance of the role, right? And and also creating a bit of leverage for those roles in organization. Because from what you said, which is quite true, people don't really take it in cognizance. People, I mean organizations, they don't really take in cognizance the importance. They are aware, right? But they don't equate the amount of attention and importance they give to social media management as to finance department or the health department or the insurance department or the HR department in these organizations.
As I'm sure you know, there are different social media platforms. I think companies are also starting to learn that you need to have someone who's an expert for each platform, not someone who has to manage all of them, because they all have different attributes, and also they are third parties with their own priorities internally, and so they all have their own strategies for what makes the algorithm work. So I think it's good to consider advocating for that as well, rather than trying to be an expert in Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat or whatever the case may be. And also understanding the product and service that you're marketing well enough to know which channel is best for you, because maybe TikTok isn't the right one for you, depending on whatever it is you're trying to sell.
Great, great, Zoe. Beautiful insights. Thank you so much. So how do we get to build visibility on social media? Like you said, now, we have to get like an expert in the different harms of social media or brand or applications of social media. I think a major contribution to merging all this workload to one particular person is still the importance attributed to the work of a social media manager. If they come to the recognition that their work is quite important and it will add to a projectile of their sales or whatever it is, I think more budget will be, thrown into the social media department. But coming back to what I'm saying, aside from having experts, managing these different social media platforms, so how do we build great visibility on social media? And what strategy do we need to, employ aside from this one that you have mentioned?
So when you say visibility for social media, do you mean company alignment, that it's something that should be prioritized? Or do you mean how do you get good reach working? Like, how do you get good reach on Instagram, for example?
Both. We're here to learn.
Okay. So the first one about how to get visibility on advocating for investment within social media, I would say what's nice about the job, for better or worse, is that you have tangible metrics that you can refer to, right? So there's, on one hand, the fact that you're kind of beholden to the apps themselves, and we don't know the inner workings of the algorithms between platforms, but there is some sort of structure to where you can compare the content that's performing well. You can also draw the analytics to see how many people clicked a link that you posted, and sometimes that link can be directly related to buying the product. And so giving numbers to show the decision makers, like, hey, this is the impact we're having, like the tangible measurable impact that social media brings to the table, really helps them go up to their board of directors or whoever creates the funding for everything to be like, okay, this is how it's giving back to the company.
Great, great. So talking about algorithms, are there special classes, workshops that talks about these things for social media managers, where they can learn all about algorithms that works with maybe different sectors of a particular organization, let's say finance or the health, anything about that.
Um, I don't know about like social media workshops specific to industries, but I do know that there's a big community of social media managers and content creators who make observations about the creator economy in general. And I want to make the distinction between a social media manager and what a content creator is. Like a content creator is just anyone that's creating stuff online that they're publishing to the internet. They could work for a company or they could work for themselves. Um, but as you know, there's like influencers and people who are posting funny videos and doing that full time. So like that's a content creator, and um, they've made observations about how this whole new economy has been created from social media. So there's a lot of like newsletters that you can sign up for to learn what they're saying. And a lot of the times, because these people's entire livelihoods depend on the algorithm, they're really studying to see what works on the platforms, and hearing from them and learning from their mistakes and iterations has been really helpful for me in gauging what hooks people and what makes a good story to post on social media. So to summarize, I think listening to creators, like following their newsletters. There's also podcasts about this. There's one called Creator Science that's great to follow. And then there's also Press Publish is a great newsletter. Um, so those are good resources for you out there. For more of a marketing, a brand perspective, Later is a tool, but also a newsletter that provides a lot of information about trending audio and updates to platforms where they're telling you what tools that have been launched. And you can also follow the apps themselves. Like Instagram has an @creators handle that tells you trending reels and tips on how to use different tools within the application.
Great, thank you so much. I hope we are all taking notes. I think one time earlier this year or late last year, I was watching a documentary about how algorithms have been made. It's mainly powered by AI, and it's an interesting stuff to watch. I think it's on Netflix. I think I would get the title before we finish, or I'll just drop it in our community and pin it there so that we can. It's an interesting format of seeing how the social media actually navigates and maybe sometimes prompts our actions, right? It's an interesting stuff, very interesting. But we're not diving into that at all. Let's stay focused, right? So, what are some key difference between the major social media platforms, and how should businesses tailor their approach to each platform?
I think, well, the first thing I would say is I think it's a trap when businesses that don't have the resources try to tailor their product to each platform. I think what they should instead do is really take a look at their product and decide who they're trying to sell it to, what are the features that are easiest to highlight, and then decide which platform highlights those features the best. So for example, I'm working for a travel company. So platforms like Instagram and TikTok, where aesthetic value is so important and like inspiring people to go out and do things is so easy. The travel aspect really fits onto those platforms. It doesn't translate as well, maybe in like a newsletter. Um, and similarly, our audience, because we're looking for college students like yourselves, you're mostly the audience that's spending time on these platforms as well. So rather than trying to position your product on an app and spend the energy forcing yourself onto the app, I'd really think about which app works for you instead. And what ends up happening, like I said before, is brands are trying to have a presence everywhere, and then that burns people out because they don't have the resources to support that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And larger percentage of organizations are still startups, right? So they have limited resources in actually having the right people handle, like you mentioned earlier, each of those platforms, right? So it's better to start off with, the best one that suits their audience. And now that you're talking, I'm just thinking about, wow, this is a wealth of knowledge. And have you heard about anything or a role called a social media consultant before? And if yes, what are their roles actually?
Yeah, so I mean, at least in the US, I don't know how it is in Nigeria or in other places, but it's funny because we often use these titles with ambiguous words like manager, a consultant, a coordinator. Like, what's the difference between all of these things? It really just depends from company to company. Being a social media consultant could also be the same thing as a social media manager. It just depends on the hiring manager who like created the role. That being said, what I've observed is that generally the hierarchy starts out with a marketing or communications intern, and then the next level is a social media coordinator. And the coordinator is going to be someone who's usually in the app itself, like writing the captions and the hashtags and doing the uploading and scheduling. So more of the like tedious aspects to social media. And then the next level up is a social media lead or a social media manager. And those people are going to have more of a high level strategy analytical position in the social media team. But sometimes, again, because resources are limited, you might have a social media doing all of the above, or a social media manager doing all of the above. A social media consultant is usually the same word tossed around for a social media manager or someone who has more like analysis and strategic thinking for planning social media.
Great, great. And this leads me to the next question. So let's take for example, I'm just a senior secondary school student. I want to dive into the social media network and career. What are the steps to take to becoming or to growing into this role and becoming a well-resourced person and get to a stage where I can actually and finally call it my career?
So my entry point into it, again, like I said before, was because I was organizing in-person events. And through that, we naturally needed a format to promote the events, which at the time was like Facebook or Instagram. So I leaned into it. But I mean, when I was at Spotify, I actually was in a technical support role before I got into social media. And as a contractor, my job wasn't necessarily secure. And so I really wanted to be full time. And I think the best advice I could give someone is if you find yourself in a company and there's a role or opportunity within the company that interests you, become friends with everyone. Like, be as helpful and resourceful as you can to anyone that looks like they have a gap or need support on, especially on projects that you think are interesting. I think the reason why they ended up choosing me for the social media role was because I was constantly asking, like, how can I help you? Oh, I saw you did this project and it seemed like maybe you needed research assistance, so I looked this up. And just really surface things to people that and do things to take work off of people's plates. And eventually they'll see how much they need you to take work off of their plate. And sometimes they'll create that role for you.
Great, great. So, and I usually say this that a teacher always learns twice, right? So, in the process of your research, you come across lots of resources, lots of ways, lots of information to become and better transit into a full-fledged social media manager, consultant, or whatever it is, the name tag you're giving to it. But most importantly, this is what the upcoming generation needs to realize and understand, especially where competition is quite stiff, in the career sphere, and especially where technology is quite bringing or shrinking job roles, right? So you being resourceful is a great entry point to whatever, not even the social media sphere alone, to whatever career path you're trying to choose. So you don't just sit down there and cross your fingers and just wait for thinking that opportunities is going to come to you. You put yourself out there. You ask, how can I be of help? What can I do? And that is what Zoe has pointed out. That is like I said, the most easiest entry point to any career path. Moving on, I hope we are getting ready our questions, both online and physically here with us. Our next question is, what effective content creation strategies can businesses employ to engage their audience on social media? Now, I'm going to rephrase this question and say that, like you pointed out, that content creation and being a social manager, they are two different things, right? But it is usually assumed that a good social manager should also possess some skills. And part of the skill is to be a good content creator. And if at all you can't create the content, you should be able to spot good content, right? Because some content are not, are not so good. Permit me to say that. So you should be able to spot in good content. Now, how do you marry the two? And how do you develop that skill? And most importantly, use that skill to push whatever organization you're working for forward.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm super excited about it because it's my favorite aspect of the job. And the number one thing I would say is you have to be a good storyteller. So when you think about social media, when you're a user, you're not on social media because you want people, you want to look at ads. You're not on there because you want someone to promote things to you. You're on there to be entertained or to connect with your friends or to find a meme or something silly to share with your friends. And so that's the headspace that you could get in, or that you need to get into, that the content that you're creating for the brand needs to have a compelling story that doesn't center what the brand is trying to promote, but is aligned with it. So what I mean is no one wants to feel like they're being sold to. Everyone wants to feel like they're a part of a story or enjoying something. So that was the number one thing, really learn how to be a good storyteller. And then the second priority after is really understanding the goals and priorities of not just the brand, but of your audience. Like, who are you trying to talk to? What do they care about? I find a lot of the times brands will go into it being like, oh, we have this sale happening next week, so let's post an Instagram story saying when the sale is and what the discount is. Like, that's great to have, but that's not super compelling, right? Like, as a viewer, it would be way more compelling to like have a funny interaction between friends who happen to maybe be shopping, and that's when you bring in this side note like, oh hey, there's also this thing happening. But it has to like give people value beyond just letting them know what you're trying to sell to them.
Great, great. I hope you're taking notes. I'm learning so much. Now I feel like being a social media manager. Right. Thank you so much, Zoe. We're gradually moving towards the audience question. But before we do that, let's quickly take a great aspect of community engagement and management. Um, Being a social manager is another work on its own. Being a community manager is another career on its own, right? But at a point, they both intersect, right? Because our community now is globalized thanks to technology and the internet, right? So most community managers manage their communities on the internet, and the internet have provided the super used platform, which is the social media. Now, as community management, engagement and management, how do you foster engagement, right? And build a sense of community on your social media platform?
So for community management, and honestly, really anything that I do in social media, because I'm trying to talk to people, I try to get into their shoes. Like, when you are engaging with a brand or when you are on social media, what are the things that inspire you to reply, to add a comment, or share your perspective of something? What inspires you to share something with your friends? Usually it's something that offers value, or it's even proposing a question directly through social media, asking your audience like, hey, what do you think about this? And that also can be a tool to get people to stay on your page longer. So for context, all of these platforms, their goal is to take up your time. They want your attention. And so any sort of content that keeps a user on the platform is going to get bonus points in the algorithm. So something I've seen people implement more to be more technical is they'll create a reel or a TikTok, for example, and in the caption they'll say, "Oh, what do you think about X thing?" So what happens is if X thing is in the middle of the video or the end of the video, someone's going to watch it all the way through the end, and then it's asking for your opinion. So then you reply, which is an additional bonus point for the algorithm. So that's like one technique that you have, but just keeping in mind, like, one, how do I support the platform's goals and how am I providing value to the audience that I'm trying to speak to? I think as long as you ask yourself those questions each time, you'll probably find some success.
Great. So the good questions, right? To ask yourself as a social media is number one, what are those things that would make me engage with a particular post, right? And staying in that light would make you create something that would probably also make people engage with your platform. All right. So, what are some strategies for effectively managing and responding to comments, messages, and reviews from your audience? Because social media can be nasty sometimes, right? But aside from being nasty, we have some people actually genuinely asking you questions, especially if you are managing the handles of brands, of organization. If it's your personal self, that's a whole different ball game, right? But how do you really, really get into the role of engaging with comments, messages, and reviews from your audience? Don't worry, we are safe.
Yeah, so one thing I want to call out is that the apps are recognizing about the toxicity within engagement. So they do have tools in place, like they use machine learning to hide comments that they think might be harmful. They also allow you to block people easier if you need to, especially if there are a lot of spam accounts. But I think when it comes to like community management, it also depends on the brand. So Spotify, for example, has like 11 million followers. Their team of 5 people managing the community aren't going to be able to talk to all 11 million people constantly. So you can also make decisions like, is it actually worth it for us to reply to comments? A lot of the times it's not. Like some companies will literally just not reply, but they'll tell people like in the description or bio, I think Spotify does this, they'll say, we have a Spotify Cares account that's specifically there for you to engage with, but like talking on this main account isn't going to get you any responses from the team. So that's one thing you can do, just create a siloed space for people to field their questions and concerns. Another aspect is there are third-party tools that you can set up. So based on certain keywords, they respond back certain things. The apps also will have things within, like tools like this within the app themselves. So you don't even need to go through a third party. So if you have a lot of the similar questions from people, like what time does your store open, then you can set it up so that it automatically responds those things without you having to be there to reply.
Great, thank you so much. That meant aside from being a social media manager, having the soft skills, you also have to have a form of technical skills in engaging with some tools that help foster a great alignment with your work. For example, chatbots. And now that we have the AI, ChatGTP can help. Integrating some of those bots with your app or your page or your website or whatever it is, it will go a long way in making your job easier. Like you said, you can't definitely be answering to 11 million people, right? So this just iterates the point that as this generation is moving up, it has become more essential to be acquainted with technological skills in whatever career you are choosing, right? So you can't be ignorant again and just say, oh, I know how to speak English very well, but you don't know how to integrate a bot. At a point, someone who does will be preferred above you will be preferred, even though you came out with a first class. So it is it is very important that you are trying to integrate tech skills with whatever it is that you're doing. So I haven't talked about that. What other tools comes in handy for a social media manager?
Um, some calendaring skills would be really good for a social media manager or a coordinator. So there are tools like I had mentioned later earlier. It's actually a scheduling tool, but they have a great blog that's free, so you can check that. And actually, I think later has a free option as well where you can log in and basically schedule out all of the content that you have in advance. And this is really helpful because if you're batch creating, it's a lot easier than trying to create one thing every single day. It's better to spend like several hours working on 30 posts and then scheduling them out so that you can be in advance of the days to come. And consistency is one of the most important things in growth for social media. So that's why scheduling in advance is so powerful. Also, because you don't want to be working like 7 days a week if you can avoid it. So being able to schedule things in advance so that you're not working on your day off is really helpful. Some other tools, I think that you can also, like you had mentioned ChatGPT. I think using ChatGPT to do some of your menial tasks can be really helpful, whether that's like content ideation. I wouldn't lean on it exclusively, like just take everything at face value. I think you as the human, as the manager, can use the recommendations to tweak them and really make them stand out for whoever, like whatever client or brand that you're working for. But ChatGPT is a great one. You can also use Canva, which is a tool for like drag and dropping designs essentially. So you can use it for anything from creating a reel to an Instagram carousel to even like an event flyer if you wanted to, or a newsletter or an email. I think someone in Kenya had mentioned there's something similar to this. I don't know if you've taught them Canva before, but it's a free tool that has a lot of stuff in there for you to play around with.
All right, thank you, Zoe. I hope you're taking notes. Um, so now we're going to, before we dive into questions for our from our audience, both online and the hobby, a quick question. So, what do you think is the salary range for, let's say, an intern, mid-level social media manager, or senior level social media manager, if there's something like that? And how do you think? What are the skills that you feel that you need to acquire aside from, let's say, the time you're working in, or the experience? What are the other skills that will make you transition from being an intern to a mid-level to a senior level, and stuff like that? Let's start
So,
with the money first.
yeah, let's start with the important stuff, the money. Yeah, I would say so. This is a tough one because I've lived in places where the cost of living is quite high. So I think the salary ranges that I'm familiar with are quite inflated, even within the United States. Um, I've seen social media coordinator roles. So this isn't quite an intern, but it's maybe the next level above an intern. They're probably earning anywhere between like 40,000 to 60,000 US, depending on the company that they're working for. And I've also seen interns earning anywhere between like $8 to $25 an hour. So it kind of just depends on where you're based. Like if you were to live in New York versus living in Dallas, Texas, your experience or like trying to work for a company based in those places, the salary range is going to vary quite a lot. I would recommend for you to get like a market analysis by going on Glassdoor, or you can even go on like Fiverr and Upwork and see what the contractors are trying to charge for social media to get a sense of what would be appropriate for your expectations.
All right, great. So the second part of the question. So from transitioning from an intern to a coordinator, like you mentioned, what are the skills that are needed to be acquired? So, like, oh, really, I'm tired of this level and I want to hand more. So, what are the skills?
I from intern to coordinator. So I think the difference with an intern is you're still trying to understand the lay of the land and how to operate on a team and for a company, and you're still really trying to understand the brand and your place within it. So I would say moving, if you're ready to move into a coordinator role where you could do the role and you know how to schedule, you know how to create a caption, you understand like what a hashtag strategy is, and you know how to implement that on your own without someone laying it out for you. Going from a coordinator to a social media lead or a social media manager is understanding strategy beyond just like I'm going to write this caption and post this picture on this day. Really understanding like, okay, right now our business goals are this, and these are the things that we should focus on through social media in order to get there. So one example is like, if I am a social media coordinator, a social media manager is going to tell me, okay, our focus for this month is um, let's say we're doing this for semester at sea. Our focus for this month is raising awareness around scholarships. So a social media manager would go and say, our strategy for social media this month is to create reels because they have a higher reach potential. And we're going to tell the social media coordinator to put together all of those reels and publish the reels in a way that's engaging. And then just to keep moving up, like beyond social lead to social media manager and like senior social media manager and all of that, it's really just the scope of the projects that you have. So going from like a smaller project that maybe requires a couple of posts to launching full scale projects that are like internationally reaching. Um, I think that would be the difference in going from like a social media lead to a social media manager or like a senior social media manager. Sorry, getting a little tongue tied.
Yeah, right. Because it's quite important, since we have a form of mixed multitude. It's I know it's a question that will be burning in the hearts of so many of our audience today, especially our high school student here, how they would essentially transit from one level to another, and what time is going to take. And aside from experience, it's very important that they know that everything that is going to be more valuable would require a level of more intentionality, right? So, and adding skills to whatever skills you have right now requires to be more intentional about it. And we've been talking about community, and we'll be talking about adding skills. And this is what we do here at Know the Blocks Mervyn. Know the Blocks Mervyn is an educational platform, both online and on site. That is, we have physical presence in schools and university that upskills young adults in emerging technologies, focusing on Web3, metaversity, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence. We currently have a workshop ongoing on Python and AI, and so many of us other emerging technologies, because we have come to know that the future is actually now, right? So this future we have been projecting all these years is already here, and we need to start living in the reality of what it is, you know.